All right, guys, so welcome back to Reading Cooper with me. I am going through and reading all of the chapter summaries and highlighting what's important to me so I can get ready for my exam. The reason why I'm recording it is so that I can listen to it when I'm at the gym or in the car as the days get closer to my test date. All right, so we are on part 3. I just read chapters 1 through 5. Now I'm on chapter 6. Part 3 is about evaluating and analyzing behavior change. Chapter 6, constructing and interpreting graphic displays of behavioral data. Okay, so applied behavior analysts document and quantify behavior change by direct and repeated measurement of behavior. And the product of those measurements is called data. Graphs are relatively simple formats for visually displaying relationships among and between a series of measurements and relative variables. Purpose and benefits of graphic displays of behavioral data. Graphing each measure of behavior as it is collected provides the practitioner or researcher with an immediate and ongoing visual record of the participant's behavior, allowing treatment and experimental decisions to be responsive to the participant's performance. Direct and continual contact with the data in a readily analyzable format enables the practitioner or researcher to identify and investigate interesting variations in behavior as they occur. As a judgmental aid for interpreting experimental results, graphic display is a fast, relatively easy to learn method that imposes no arbitrary levels of significance for evaluating behavior change. Visual analysis of graph data is a conservative method for determining the significance of behavior change. Only variables able to produce meaningful effects repeatedly are considered significant, and weak and unstable variables are screened out. Graphics enable and encourage independent judgment of the meaning and significance of behavior change by others. Graphs can serve as effective sources of feedback to the people whose behavior they represent. Graphs used by applied behavior analysts. Line graphs. The most commonly used format for the graphic display of behavioral data are based on the Cartesian plane, a two-dimensional area formed by the intersection of two perpendicular lines. Major parts of the simple line graph are the horizontal axis, also called the x-axis. The vertical axis, also called the y-axis, condition change lines, condition labels, data points, the data path, and the figure caption. Graphs with multiple data paths on the same set of axes are used in applied behavior analysis to show two or more dimensions of the same behavior. B, two or more different behaviors. C, the same behavior under different and alternating experimental conditions. D, changes in the target behavior relative to the changing values of an independent variable. And E, the behavior of two or more participants. A second vertical axis, which is drawn on the right-hand side of the horizontal axis, is sometimes used to show different scales for multiple data paths. Bar graphs are used for two primary purposes. A, to display discrete data not related to an underlying dimension that can be used to scale the horizontal axis, and B, to summarize and enable easy comparison of the performance of the participant or group of participants during different conditions of an experiment. Each data point on a cumulative record represents the total number of responses emitted by the subject since measurement began. The steeper the slope of the data on the cumulative graph, the higher the response rate. Overall, response rate refers to the average rate of responses over a given time period. A local response rate refers to the rate of response during smaller period within a larger period for which an overall response rate has been given. Cumulative records are especially effective for displaying data when A, the total number of responses made over time is important, B, the graph is used as a source of feedback to the subject, C, the target behavior can only occur once per measurement period, and D, a fine analysis of a single instance or proportions of data form an experiment is desired. Ratio charts use logarithmic scaled y-axis so that changes in behavior that are equal proportion, example, doublings of the response measure, are represented by equal distances on the vertical axis. The standard acceleration chart is a 6-cycle multiplied graph that enables the standardized charting of acceleration, a linear measure of frequency change across time, a factor by which frequency multiplies or divides per unit of time. A scatter plot shows the relative distribution of individual measurements in a data set with respect to the variables depicted on the X and Y axes. Constructing line graphs. The vertical graph is drawn to a length approximately 2/3 of the horizontal axis. The horizontal axis is marked in equal intervals, each representing from left to right the chronological succession of equal time periods within which behavior was measured. Scale breaks on the horizontal axis indicate discontinuities of time. The vertical axis is scaled relative to the dimension of behavior measured, the range of values of the measures obtained, and the social significance of various levels of change in the target behavior. Condition change lines indicate change in the treatment program or manipulations of an independent variable and are drawn to the same height as the vertical axis. A brief descriptive label identifies each condition of an experiment or behavior change program. Data points should be accurately placed with bold, solid dots. When multiple data points are used, different geometric symbols are used to distinguish each data set. Data paths are created by connecting successive data points with a straight line. Successive data points should not be connected when A, they fall on either side of a condition change line, B, they span a significant period in which behavior was not measured, C, they span discontinuities of time on the horizontal axis, D, they fall on either side of a regularly scheduled measurement period in which data are not collected or were lost, destroyed, or otherwise not available, E, they fall in a follow-up or post-check period that is not regularly spaced in time, in the same manner as the result of the study, or F, one member of the pair falls outside the range of values described by the vertical axis. The figure caption provides a concise but complete description of the graph, giving all the information needed to interpret the display. Graphs should be printed in black ink only. Interpreting graphically displayed behavioral data. Visual analysis of graph data attempts to answer two questions. A, did a socially meaningful change in behavior take place? And B, if so, can the behavior change be attributed to the independent variable? Before beginning to evaluate the data displayed on the graph, a careful examination of the graph's construct should be undertaken. If distortion is suspected from the features of the graph's construction, the data should be replotted in a new set of axes before interpretation is attempted. Block data and data representing the average performance of a group of subjects should be viewed with the understanding that significant variability may have been lost in the display. Visual analysis of data should be given within a given condition focuses on the number of data points, the variability of performance, the level of performance, and the direction and degree of any trend in the data. As a general rule, the more data in a condition and greater the stability of those data, the more confidence one can place on the data path's estimate of behavior during that time. The more variability in the behavioral measures during a condition, the greater a need for additional data. Variability refers to the frequency and degree to which multiple measures of behavior yield different outcomes. A high degree of variability within a given condition usually indicates that little or no control has been achieved over the factors influencing the behavior. Level refers to the value on the vertical axis around which a series of data points converges. When the data in a given condition all fall at or near a specific level, the behavior is considered stable with respect to level, to the extent that another. The data are described as showing variability with respect to level. In cases of extreme variability, no particular level of performance is evidenced. Mean or median level lines are sometimes added to graphic displays to represent the overall average or typical performance during a condition. Mean and median level lines should be used and interpreted with care because they can obscure important variability and trends in the data. Trend refers to the overall direction taken by a data path. Trends are described in terms of their direction: increasing, decreasing, or zero trend, degree, gradually or steep, and the extent of variability of data points around the trend. Trend, direction, and degree can be visually represented by drawing a trend line or line of progress through a series of data points. Trend lines can be drawn freehand using the least squares regression equation, or using a method called the split middle line of progress. Split middle lines of progress can be drawn quickly and reliably and have proven useful in analyzing behavior change. Visual analysis of data across conditions determines whether change in level, trend, or variability occurred and to what extent any changes were significant. Chapter 7, Analyzing Behavior Change, Basic Assumptions and Strategies. Introduction. Measurement can show whether, when, and how much behavior changes, but measurement alone cannot reveal why the behavior changes occurred. A useful technology of behavior change depends upon knowing that specific arrangement of environmental variables will reliably produce desired forms of behavior change. An experimental analysis must be performed to determine how a given behavior functions in relation to specific environmental events. Concepts and assumptions underlying the analysis of behavior. The overall goal of science is to achieve an understanding of the phenomenon under study, socially important behaviors in the case of applied behavior analysis. Science produces understanding at 3 levels: description, prediction, and control. Descriptive research yields a collection of facts about the observed events. Facts can be quantified and classified. A correlation exists when 2 events systematically covary with one another. Predictions can be made about the probability that one event will occur based on the occurrence of another event. Experimental control, the path to and goal of behavior analysis. The greatest potential benefits of science are derived from the 3rd and highest level of scientific understanding, which comes from establishing experimental control. Experimental control is achieved when a predictable change in behavior, the dependent variable, is reliably produced by the systematic manipulation of some aspect of the environment, the independent variable. An analysis of behavior has been achieved when a reliable function relation between the behavior and some specified aspect of the environment has been demonstrated convincingly. A functional analysis does not eliminate the possibility that the behavior under investigation is also a function of other variables. An experiment that shows convincingly that change in behavior are a function of the independent variable and not a result of uncontrolled or unknown variables has internal validity. External validity refers to the degree to which a study's results are generalizable to other subjects, settings, and behaviors. Behavior, defining features and assumptions that guide its analysis. Confounding variables exert unknown or uncontrolled influences on the dependent variable. Because behavior is an individual phenomenon, the experimental strategies of behavior analysis feature within subject or single case methods of analysis. Because behavior is a dynamic and continuous phenomenon that occurs in and changes through time, measuring behavior as it changes over time is a fundamental feature of applied behavior analysis. The assumption of determinism guides experimental method in behavior analysis. Experimental methods in behavior analysis also derive from the assumption that behavioral variability is extrinsic to the organism, not an inherent trait. That is, variability is imposed by environmental variables. Behavior analysts strive to isolate and experimentally manipulate the environmental factors responsible for variability. Components of applied behavior analysis experiments. A research question specifies that the investigator wants to learn from conducting the experiment. All aspects of an experiment's design and conduct should follow from it. Experiments in applied behavior analysis are referred to a single case research design because the experimental logic for detecting and analyzing behavior change employs each subject as his or her own control. The dependent variable in an applied behavior analysis experiment is a measurable dimension quantity of the target behavior. Some studies include multiple dependent variables for 3 reasons. A, to provide additional data paths that serve as controls for evaluating and replicating the effects of the independent variable as it's applied sequentially to each behavior. B, to assess the presence and extent of the independent variable's effect on behaviors other than the response class to which it is applied directly. And C, to determine whether changes in the behavior of a person other than the subject occurred during the course of an experiment, and whether such changes might in turn explain observed changes in the subject's behavior. In addition to precise manipulation of the independent variable, the behavior analyst must hold constant all other aspects of the experimental setting, extraneous variables, to prevent unplanned environmental variation. When unplanned events or variations occur in the experimental setting, the behavior analyst must either wait out their effects or incorporate them into the design of the experiment. Observation and measurement procedures must be conducted in a standardized manner throughout an experiment. Because behavior is a continuous and dynamic phenomenon, ongoing visual inspection of the data is necessary to identify changes in trend, level, and/or variability as they develop during the course of an experiment. Changes in the independent variable are made to maximize its effects on the target behavior. The term experimental design refers to the sequence and form of independent variable manipulations in a study. Although an infinite number of experimental designs are possible as a result of the many ways independent variables can be manipulated and combined, an experimenter can make only 2 basic kinds of independent variable changes: introduce a new condition or reinstate an old condition. A parametric study compares the differential effects of different values of independent variables. The fundamental rule of experimentation: change only one variable at a time. Rather than follow rigid pro forma experimental designs, behavior analysts should select experimental tactics suited to the original research question, while standing ready to explore relevant variables by manipulating them in an improvised and rapidly changing design. Skinner, 1966, page 21. Steady state, strategy, and baseline logic. Steady state responding enables a form of inductive reasoning called baseline logic. Baseline logic entails three elements: prediction, verification, and replication. The most common method for evaluating the effects of a given variable is to impose it on an ongoing measure of behavior obtained in its absence. These pre-intervention data serve as the baseline against which any observed changes in behavior when the independent variable is introduced can be compared. A baseline condition does not necessarily mean the absence of instruction or treatment per se, only the absence of a specific independent variable of experimental interest. In addition to the primary purpose of establishing a baseline as an objective bias for evaluating the effects of the independent variable, three other reasons for baseline data collection are: A, systematic observation of the target behavior prior to intervention sometimes yields information about antecedent behavior consequent correlations that may be useful in planning effective intervention. B, baseline data can provide valuable guidance in setting initial criterion for reinforcement. And C, baseline data may reveal that the behavior targeted for change does not warrant intervention. Four types of baseline data patterns are stable: ascending, descending, and variable. The independent variable should be introduced when stable baseline responding has been achieved. The independent variable should not be introduced when an ascending or descending baseline indicates improving performance. The independent variable should be introduced when an ascending or descending baseline indicates deteriorating performance. An independent variable should not be imposed on a highly variable, unstable baseline. Affirmation of the consequent. Prediction of future behavior can be made when repeated measures of behavior under relatively constant environmental conditions show little or no variation. Practice effects refer to improvements in performance resulting from opportunities to emit the behavior that must be provided to obtain repeated measures. Extended baseline measurement is not necessary for behaviors that have no logical opportunity to occur. The predictive power of steady state responding enables a form of inductive reasoning known as affirmation of the consequent. Although the logic of affirmation of the consequent is flawed, some other event may be cause the change in behavior. An effective experimental design confirms several if A then B possibilities, each one reducing the likelihood that factors other than the independent variable are responsible for the observed changes in behavior. Verification is accomplished by demonstrating that the prior level of baseline responding would have remained unchanged had the independent variable not been introduced. Replication within an experiment means reproducing a previous observed behavior change by reintroducing the independent variable. Replication demonstrates the reliability of a behavior change and reduces the probability that some factor other than the independent variable was responsible for the now twice observed behavior change. Chapter 8, Reversal and Multi-Element Design. Reversal design. The reversal tactic, ABA, entails repeated measures of behavior in a given setting during 3 consecutive phases: baseline, independent variable absent; B, treatment, independent variable present; and C, return to baseline, independent variable absent. Reintroducing the independent variable in the form of an ABAB design strengthens the reversal design tremendously. The ABAB design is the most straightforward and generally most powerful intra-subject design for demonstrating functional relations. Variations of the ABAB design. Extending the ABAB design with repeated reversal may provide a more convincing demonstration of a functional relation than a design with one reversal. The BAB reversal design can be used with target behaviors for which an initial baseline phase is inappropriate or not possible for ethical or practical reasons. Multiple treatment, reversal design, A, B, C, B, C, A, B, C, A, C, B, C, use the reversal tactic to compare the effects of two or more experimental conditions to baseline and or to one another. Multiple treatment reversal designs are particularly susceptible to confounding by sequence effects. The non-contingent reinforcement NCR reversal technique enables the isolation and analysis of the contingent aspects of reinforcement. Reversal techniques incorporating differential reinforcement control conditions, DRO and DRA, can also be used to analyze the effect of contingent reinforcement. Considering the appropriateness of the reversal design. Experimental designs featuring the reversal tactics are ineffective in evaluating the effects of treatment variables that, by their very nature, cannot be withdrawn once presented. Example, instruction, modeling. Once changed during treatment, some behaviors will not reverse to baseline levels when the independent variable has been withdrawn. Such behavioral irreversibility precludes effective use of the reversal design. Withdrawing a seemingly effective treatment variable to provide scientific verification of its function and changing behavior may raise legitimate social, educational, and ethical concerns. Brief reversal phases, sometimes even one session baseline probes, may be sufficient to demonstrate believable experimental control. Multiple element design. The multiple element design, also called alternating treatment design, compares two or more treatments, independent variables, while their effects on the target behavior, dependent variable, are measured. In a multi-element design, each successive data point for a specific treatment plays three roles. A basis for the prediction of future levels of responding under that treatment. B, potential verification of the prediction of performance under that treatment. And C, the opportunity for replication of previous effects produced by that treatment. Experimental control is demonstrated in a multi-element design when the data passed for two different treatments show little or no overlap. The extent of differential effects produced by two treatments is determined by the vertical distance between their respective data paths and quantified by the vertical axis scale. Variations of the multi-element design. Common variations of the multi-element alternating treatment design include the following. Single-phase design, alternating two or more conditions, one of which may be no treatment control condition. Two-phase design, initial baseline and comparison phase. Three-phase design, initial baseline, alternating treatment, and best treatment only. Three-phase design, initial baseline, alternating treatment, and participant's choice. Concurrent chains or scheduled design. Advantages of the multi-element design. Advantages of the multi-element alternating treatment design include the following. It does not require treatment withdrawal, rapidly compares the relative effectiveness of treatment, minimizes the irreversibility problem, minimizes sequence effects, can be used with unstable data patterns, can assess generalization of effects, intervention can begin immediately. Considering the appropriateness of multi-element design. Multi-element design are susceptible to multiple treatment interference. However, by following the alternating treatment phase with a phase in which only one treatment is administered, the experimenter can assess the effects of that treatment in isolation. The rapid back and forth switching of treatment conditions does not typify clinical or educational practice and may be viewed as artificial and undesirable. An alternating treatment phase is usually limited to a maximum of 4 different treatment conditions. Multi-element designs are most effective in revealing the differential effects of treatment conditions that differ significantly from one another. Multi-element designs are not effective for assessing the effects of independent variables that change behavior only when implemented over a continuous period of time. Chapter 9, Multiple Baseline and Changing Criterion Design. Multiple baseline design. In a multiple baseline design, simultaneous baseline measurement is begun on two or more behaviors. After stable baseline responding has been achieved, the independent variable is applied to one of the behaviors while baseline conditions remain in effect for the other behaviors. After maximum change has been noted in the first behavior, the independent variable is applied in sequential fashion to the other behaviors in the design. Experimental control is demonstrated in a multiple baseline design by each behavior changing when and only when the independent variable is applied. The multiple baseline takes three basic forms: a multiple baseline across behaviors, design consisting of two or more different behaviors of the same subject, multiple baseline across settings, design consisting of the same behavior of the same subject in two or more different settings, and C, a multiple baseline across subjects, design consisting of the same behavior of two or more different participants. Variations of the multiple baseline design. The multiple probe design is effective for evaluating the effects of instruction on skill sequence in which it is highly unlikely that the participant's performance on later steps in the sequence can improve without instruction or mastery of earlier steps in the chain. Multiple probe design is also appropriate for situations in which prolonged baseline measurement may prove reactive, impractical, or too costly. In a multiple probe design, intermittent measures or probes are taken on all of the behaviors in the design at the outset of the experiment. Therefore, probes are taken each time the subject masters one of the behaviors or skills in the sequence. Just prior to instruction on each behavior, a series of baseline measures is taken until stability is achieved. The delayed multiple baseline design provides an analytic tactic in situations in which A planned reversal design is no longer desirable or possible, B, limited resources preclude a full-scale multiple baseline design, or C, a new behavior, setting, or subject appropriate for an ongoing multiple baseline analysis becomes available. In delayed multiple baseline measurement of subsequent behaviors is begun sometime after baseline measurement begun on earlier behaviors in the design. Only baseline begun while earlier behaviors in the design are still under baseline condition can be used to verify predictions made for the earlier behaviors. Limitations of the delayed multiple baseline design include A, behavior analysts may have to wait too long to modify certain behaviors. B, baseline phases may contain too few data points. And C, baselines begun after the independent variable has been applied to earlier behaviors in the design can mask the independence covariation of behaviors. The non-concurrent multiple baseline across participant design consists of a series of A-B baseline intervention sequences conducted across subjects at different points in time. The non-concurrent multiple baseline across participants design is inherently weaker than other multiple baseline design variations. The non-concurrent design entails two of three elements of baseline logic: prediction and replication, but the absence of concurrent baseline measures does not enable verification of intervention effects. Assumption and guidelines for using multiple baseline design. Behaviors that are part of multiple baseline design should be functionally independent. They do not covary and share a responsible likelihood that each will change when the independent variable is applied to it. Behaviors in a multiple baseline design should be measured concurrently and have an equal opportunity of being influenced by the same set of relevant variables. In a multiple baseline design, the independent variable should not be applied to the next behavior until the previous behavior has changed maximally and a sufficient period of time has elapsed to detect any effects on behavior still in baseline condition. The length of the baseline phases for the different behaviors making up a multiple baseline design should vary significantly. All other things being equal, the independent variable should be applied first to the behavior showing the most stable level or counter-therapeutic trend of baseline. Conducting a reversal phase in one or more tiers of a multiple baseline design can strengthen the demonstration of a functional relation. Considering the appropriateness of multiple baseline design. Advantages of multiple baseline design include the fact that A, it does not require withdrawing a seemingly effective treatment. B, sequentially implementation of the independent variable parallels the practice of many teachers and clinicians whose task is to change multiple behaviors in different settings and/or subjects. C, the concurrent measurement of multiple behaviors allows direct monitoring of generalization of behavior change. And D, the design is relatively easy to conceptualize and implement. Limitations of the multiple baseline design include the fact that A, if two or more behaviors Limitations of multiple baseline include the fact that if two or more behaviors in the design co-vary, the multiple baseline design may not demonstrate a functional relation even though one exists. B, because verification must be inferred from the lack of change in other behaviors, the multiple baseline design is inherently weaker than the reversal design in showing experimental control between the independent variable and a given behavior. The multiple baseline design is more an evaluation of the independent variable's general effectiveness than an analysis of behaviors involved in the design. And D, conducting a multiple baseline design experiment requires considerable time and resources. Changing criterion design. The changing criterion design can be used to evaluate the effects of a treatment on the gradual or stepwise improvement of a behavior already in the subject's repertoire. After stable baseline responding has been achieved, the first treatment phase is begun, in which reinforcement is usually contingent on the subject performing at a specified level or criterion. The design entails a series of treatment phases, each requiring an improved level of performance over the previous phase. Experimental control is demonstrated when the subject's behavior closely conforms to the changing criterion. In a range-bound changing criterion design, each intervention subphase includes both a lower and an upper criterion with which the subject is expected to perform. Three features combine to determine the potential for a changing criterion design to demonstrate experimental control. A, the length of phases, B, the magnitude of criterion changes, and C, the number of criterion changes. The believability of the changing criterion design is enhanced if a previous criteria is reinstated and the subject's behavior reverses to the level previously observed under that criterion. Considering the appropriateness of changing criterion design. Advantages of changing criteria design are A, it does not require a withdrawal reversal of seemingly effective treatment. B, it enables an experimental analysis within the context of gradually improving behaviors, thus complementing the goals of practitioners. Limitations of changing criterion design are A, the target behavior must already be in the subject's repertoire, and B, incorporating the necessary features of the design may impede optimal learning rates. Chapter 10, Analyzing and Evaluating Applied Behavior Analysis, Research. Importance of the individual subject in behavior analysis research. Behavior analysis research method featured repeated measures of the behavior of individual organisms within and across experimental conditions. By contrast, a between-group experiment follows a sequence like this. A pool of subjects is selected randomly from the population of interest. The subjects are divided randomly into experimental group and a control group. The pretest measure of the dependent variable is obtained for all subjects in each group. Individual pretest scores for the subjects in each group are combined and the means and standard deviation are calculated. Subjects in the experimental group are exposed to the independent variable. A post-test measure of the dependent variable is obtained for all subjects and means and standard deviations are computed for each group. Various statistical tests compare any changes in each group's score from pre-test to post-test, applying to the data that enables inferences regarding the likelihood that any difference between the two groups' performances can be attributed to the independent variable. Knowing that the average performance of a group subject change may not reveal anything about the performance of the individual subjects. To be most useful, a treatment must be understood at the level at which people come to contact with it and are affected by it, the individual level. Mean performance of a group of subjects hides inter-subject variability in the data. Attempting to cancel out variability through statistical manipulation neither eliminates its presence in the data nor controls the variables responsible for it. When repeated measurement reveals significant variability, the researcher should seek to identify and control the factors responsible for it. The researcher who attributes the effects of unknown or uncontrolled variables to chance is likely to identify and analyze important variables. To control the effects of any variable, a researcher must either hold it constant throughout the experiment or manipulate it as an independent variable. Group data may not represent actual behavioral processes. A great strength of within subject experimental design is a convincing demonstration of a functional relation made possible by replication within the design itself. The overall performance of a group is socially significant in many situations. When group results do not represent individual performances, researchers should implement group data with individual results. When the behavior analyst cannot control access to the experimental setting or identify individual subjects, the dependent variable must consist of the responses made by individuals who enter the experimental setting. Importance of flexibility in experimental design. An effective experimental design is any sequence of independent variable manipulations that produces data that effectively and convincingly addresses the research questions. No ready-made experimental design awaits selection, nor is there a set of rules that must be followed. To investigate the research question of interest, an experimenter must often build an experimental design that employs a combination of analytic tactics. A component analysis is any experiment designed to identify the active elements of a treatment condition, the relative contributions of different components in a treatment package, and/or necessity and sufficiency of treatment components. Two basic methods are used for conducting component analysis. Dropout component analysis. The investigator presents and assesses the treatment package as a whole, then systematically removes components. Add-in component analysis. The investigator present and assess components individually or in combination, then present the complete treatment package. The most effective experimental design use ongoing evaluation of data from individual subjects as the basis for employing the three elements of baseline logic: prediction, verification, and replication. Internal validity controlling potential sources of confounding in experimental design. Experiments that demonstrate a clear functional relation between independent variable and target behavior have a high degree of internal validity. An experimental design strength is determined by the extent to which it A, demonstrates a reliable effect, and B, eliminates and reduces the likelihood that factors other than the independent variable produce the behavior change. Although the term experimental control implies that the researcher controls the subject's behavior, the researcher can control only some aspects of the subject's environment. A confounding variable is an uncontrolled factor known or suspected to have exerted influence on the dependent variable. Confounding variables can be viewed as related primarily to one of the four elements of an experiment: subject, setting, measurement of the dependent variable, and independent variable. A placebo control separates effects that may be produced by a subject's expectation of improvement as a result of receiving treatment from the effects of actually produced by the treatment. With a double-blind control procedure, neither the subject nor the observers know when the independent variable is present or absent. Treatment integrity refers to the extent to which the independent variable is implemented or carried out as planned. Procedural fidelity refers to the extent to which procedures in all conditions of an experiment, including baseline, are correctly implemented. Low treatment integrity invites a major source of confounding into an experiment, making it difficult, if not impossible, to interpret the results with confidence. One threat to treatment integrity, treatment drift, occurs when application of the independent variable during later phases of the experiment differs from the way the treatment was applied at the study's outset. Achieving a high level of treatment integrity begins with a precise operational definition of treatment procedures. Simplifying and standardizing the independent variable and providing criterion-based training and practice for the people responsible for implementing it enhance treatment integrity. Researchers should not assume that a person's general competence or experience in the experimental setting, or that providing the intervention agent with detailed written instruction or script will ensure a high degree of treatment integrity. Treatment integrity, procedural fidelity, data describe the extent to which the actual implementation of experimental procedures match their descriptions in the methods section of research report. Treatment integrity, procedural fidelity data are required for studies' inclusion in systematic reviews of literature conducted by professional and government organizations. Social validity, assessing the applied value of behavioral changes and treatment that accomplishes them. The social validity of an applied behavior analysis study should be assessed in 3 ways: the social significance of the behavior change goals, the appropriateness of the intervention, and the social importance of their result. Experts and persons who use the prospective skill in natural environments can help researchers identify socially valid target behaviors. Socially valid goals can be determined empirically by assessing the performance of individuals judged to be highly competent in experimentally manipulating different levels of performance to determine socially valid outcomes. Several scales and questionnaires for obtaining consumers' opinions of the acceptability of behavioral interventions has been developed. Preference for interventions can be assessed directly by arranging experimental conditions in which practitioners or clients can choose which of multiple treatments to implement or receive. Methods for assessing the social validity of outcomes include A, having consumers rate the social validity of participants' performance, B, asking experts to evaluate participant performance, C, comparing participant performance to that of normative sample, D, standardized assessment instruments, and E, relative real-world test of participants' performance. External validity, replicating experiments to determine the generality of research findings. External validity refers to the degree to which functional relation found reliable and socially valid in a given experiment operates under different conditions. Group design researchers assume that indicating many subjects increase the external validity or generality of a study's findings to other individuals. The assumption of increased generality violates a fundamental premise of the between group method. The proper inferences about the result of a group design are from the sample of the population, not from the sample to the individual. A between group experiment does not demonstrate a functional relation between the behavior of any subject as some aspect of his or her environment. The external validity of its findings is moot. Although between group designs and tests of statistically significance are necessary and effective tools for answering certain types of research questions, they have contributed little to an effective technology of behavior change. The generality of research finding in applied behavior analysis is assessed, established, and specified by replicating experiments. In a direct replication, the researcher makes every effort to duplicate exactly the conditions of an earlier experiment. In a systematic replication, The researcher purposely varies one or more aspects of the earlier experiment. When a systematic replication successfully produces the result of previous research, it not only demonstrates the reliability of the earlier findings, but also adds to the generality of the earlier findings by showing that the same effect can be obtained under different conditions. Systematic replication occurs in both planned and unplanned ways through the work of many experimenters in a given area, and they result in a body of knowledge with a significant scientific integrity and technological value. Evaluating applied behavior analysis research. The quality and value of an applied behavior analysis study may be evaluated by seeking answers to a sequence of questions related to internal validity, social validity, maintenance and generalization of behavior change, external validity, and scientific and theoretical significance. Type 1 error occurs when the researcher concludes that the independent variable had an effect on the dependent variable when it did not. Type 2 error occurs when a researcher concludes that an independent did not have effect on a dependent variable when it did. Visual analysis effectively identifies variables that produce strong, large, and reliable effects, which contribute to an effective and robust technology of behavior change. Statistical analysis detects the slightest possible correlations between the independent and dependent variables, which may lead to the identification of inclusion of weak and unreliable variables in the technology. A study can yield significant results from an applied perspective, demonstrate a functional relation between the independent variable and a socially important target behavior, yet contribute little to the advancement of the field. Only when all the variables influencing a functional relation have been identified and accounted for can analysis be considered complete. When evaluating the scientific significance of research report, readers should consider the technological description of the experiment, the interpretation and discussion of the results, and the level of conceptual sense and integrity.